Seattle was a fresh start. Rain, coffee, and the promise of anonymity. I, Eleanor Vance, a simple history teacher, craved that anonymity. Escaping a past littered with broken promises and a shattered heart, I sought solace in the misty embrace of the Emerald City. My apartment overlooking Puget Sound became my sanctuary, its windows framing the ever-changing moods of the sea, mirroring my own turbulent emotions. Days were spent navigating the labyrinthine corridors of Seattle High, my voice echoing in the cavernous classrooms as I brought history alive for a new generation. Evenings were dedicated to exploring my new city, each coffee shop, bookstore, and park becoming a familiar haven. It was during one of these solitary explorations that I encountered him. He was leaning against a lamppost, a figure seemingly sculpted from the shadows themselves. His name was Eric, and he had eyes that held the secrets of the ages. There was an aura about him, a magnetic pull that drew me in, making my heart pound like a drum in my chest. Little did I know then, this chance meeting would irrevocably alter the course of my life, plunging me into a nightmare far more terrifying than any history book could ever detail. His voice was like velvet, smooth and rich as he spoke, his words washing over me, erasing the cacophony of the city around us. He was a writer, he said, drawn to Seattle by its brooding beauty, its melancholic charm. He spoke of finding inspiration in the city's hidden corners, in the stories whispered by the wind that whipped through its streets. I found myself captivated, hanging on to his every word. There was an intensity in his gaze, a depth in his eyes that seemed to see right through me, reading my soul like an open book. He was different from anyone I had ever met, exciting and dangerous all at once. Our conversations stretched late into the night, fueled by endless cups of coffee and shared dreams. He was a man of contradictions, a tapestry woven from darkness and light. He could be charming and witty one moment, brooding and intense the next. I was drawn to his enigmatic nature, like a moth to a flame, oblivious to the danger that lurked beneath the surface. With every passing day, I found myself falling deeper under his spell. He was an enigma I was desperate to unravel, a mystery I yearned to solve. But like a ship sailing too close to the rocks, I was blind to the storm that was brewing, the tempest that threatened to shatter my world. Our courtship was a whirlwind of stolen moments and whispered promises. Eric possessed an uncanny ability to anticipate my every desire, to shower me with gestures that spoke volumes without uttering a single word. He filled my life with poetry and passion, painting my world in vibrant hues I never knew existed. He proposed on a starless night, the city lights reflecting in his eyes, transforming them into twin pools of molten gold. It was a moment straight out of a fairy tale, his voice husky with emotion as he pledged his undying love. In that instant I was lost, swept away by the tide of his affection, oblivious to the undercurrent of something darker that lurked beneath the surface. My family, however, harbored reservations. They found him distant, his smiles never quite reaching those fathomless eyes. His aversion to sunlight, his preference for nocturnal rendezvous, all raised red flags in their minds. But I, blinded by love, dismissed their concerns as mere overprotectiveness. I was an adult, capable of making my own decisions, and my decision was Eric. As the wedding day approached, a sense of unease began to creep into my heart, a disquiet I couldn't quite place. It was as if a shadow had fallen over my happiness, a premonition of the darkness that was to come. But I pushed these thoughts aside, convincing myself it was just pre-wedding jitters. I was about to marry the man of my dreams, the one who had awakened my soul. What could possibly go wrong? The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of activity. The whirlwind of preparations, the constant stream of well-wishers, all served to drown out the nagging voice of doubt that whispered in the recesses of my mind. Yet, certain incidents, seemingly insignificant at the time, began to weave a tapestry of unease in the back of my mind. There was a strange aversion in Eric's eyes whenever the subject of the wedding ceremony arose. He insisted on a small private affair held at twilight in a secluded manner outside the city. He dismissed my suggestions for a church wedding, claiming it to be too ostentatious for his liking. Then there were his reactions, or lack thereof, to certain scents. Garlic bread, a staple at family dinners, seemed to make him visibly uncomfortable. He refused to enter churches, even when I pleaded with him to accompany me to admire their architectural beauty. He brushed it off as personal preference, but a seed of doubt had been sown in my mind. One particularly chilling incident occurred just a week before the wedding. I stumbled upon him in his study, hunched over a book, his face illuminated by a single flickering candle. His eyes, when they met mine, were filled with a hunger that sent shivers down my spine. The book, I noticed, was ancient, its pages filled with arcane symbols and disturbing illustrations. When I questioned him about it, he simply chuckled, a humorless sound that sent chills down my spine, and dismissed it as research for his writing. Despite these unsettling occurrences, I clung to the belief that love could conquer all, that my Eric was not the monster my intuition was beginning to paint him as. I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. The manor stood on a windswept cliff overlooking the restless sea, its silhouette stark against the bruised canvas of the twilight sky. The air crackled with an unnatural energy, a palpable tension that mirrored the turmoil brewing within me. The ceremony was a subdued affair, the guests a small gathering of close friends and family, their faces etched with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. As I stood at the altar, my hand trembling in Eric's cold grip, a wave of dizziness washed over me. His eyes, usually so full of warmth, now seemed to burn with an unholy light, their depths holding a promise of something sinister. The words of the ceremony seemed to echo in the cavernous hall, their meaning lost in the maelstrom of emotions that raged within me. And then it was done. The vows were spoken. The ring, a simple silver band, cold against my skin, sealed my fate. As Eric leaned in for the kiss, a shiver ran down my spine. His lips were ice against mine, his breath devoid of warmth, carrying with it a faint metallic tang that sent a wave of nausea through me. Fear, primal and instinctive, began to claw its way up my throat, choking the air from my lungs. This was not the man I had fallen in love with. This creature, this monster, wearing Eric's face, had me trapped in a nightmare of my own making. The celebration that followed was a muted affair. The guests, sensing the shift in atmosphere, whispered amongst themselves, their gazes flitting nervously between Eric and me. I tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, forcing a smile onto my lips, but fear, cold and clammy, held me captive. As the night deepened, Eric became increasingly agitated. He paced the room like a caged animal, his eyes darting around with a mixture of hunger and anxiety. He refused all food and drink, claiming a sudden headache. His discomfort was palpable, his true nature threatening to break free from the thin veneer of humanity he wore. Finally, unable to bear the suffocating atmosphere any longer, I excused myself and made my way to our room. The manor, once grand and imposing, now felt oppressive, its shadows closing in on me like grasping claws. As I reached for the doorknob, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night, followed by a cacophony of terrified shouts. My heart hammered against my ribs as I whirled around, my blood turning to ice at the sight that greeted me. Standing at the top of the grand staircase, bathed in the eerie glow of the moon, was Eric. But he was no longer the man I had married. His face was contorted in a grotesque snarl, his eyes glowing with an unholy light, fangs elongated, dripping with blood. In his hands he held the limp form of a waiter, the unfortunate soul's lifeblood staining the pristine marble floor crimson. "Eric?" I whispered, my voice a mere tremor in the sudden silence that had descended upon the hall. He turned towards me, a terrifying smile spreading across his face, and in that moment I knew my husband, the man I had loved, was a monster, and I was trapped in his nightmare.